Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. This week's video is episode 6 of the van build series, where we do a lot of sanding, get ready for the final coat of primer, fix some rust that we found in the van, and pick out a paint color for the top coat. So we start out by sanding off the spots where we put in spot putty. And what spot putty does is it fills in the small tiny holes that the Bondo leaves behind. Because as you smooth over the Bondo with a putty knife while it's still wet, you tend to leave little tiny holes in it that the Bondo can't fill in. So the spot putty is a thinner material that spreads easier, and it's not meant to build very high. So it's basically just a final finish on the Bondo areas to smooth those out and make sure that you don't have any pinholes that show up in the Bondo after spreading it. So this process, it took a good while to get all of that sanded and all of the Bondo to be as smooth as we needed it to be for the final coat of primer. In the final coat of primer, we wanted it to be pretty much as smooth as we want the top coat to be, because we really need a good base to spray the top coat onto. And the thing about the primer is it is going to be sanded, so there is a little bit of forgiveness there when you spray it, but you really don't want to have to sand it too much, because then you break through the paint down to the metal and then you end up having to prime those areas again. So we make a couple of rounds around the van, finding the little pinholes in the Bondo, putting more spot putty on, allowing it to dry. We go back with the inline sander, hit some more sides or some more spots in the van, and keep going until we get all the Bondo spots as smooth and clean as we can get them. The next thing that we did is we had to fix the places around the windows that we modified so that our motion windows would fit in. And what we did from the last video that you saw in episode 5 of the van build series is we added in plates to the corners of the windows by welding them in, and then we ground them down to where they fit the window perfectly. And what we had to do to make them fit even better and hopefully seal better was to put Bondo around the little plates that we welded in to basically smooth them out and bring them up to the same level that the rest of the window seal was. And the reason we wanted to do this is so that you wouldn't have an indentation around the area where we had welded in the plates and cause the potential for a leak there. So we put those in, put the Bondo in there, and scraped off the extra with a putty knife and then let it dry. And while it was drying, we did a lot more sanding on the van. So basically we went over the van everywhere from top to bottom, everywhere that we were going to put the final coat of primer on. Went over it multiple times with 180 grit sandpaper on the power sanders. And even after that, we had to go over a lot of places by hand. And so we make our way around the entire van with the sandpaper, with the 180 grit sandpaper, smoothing out all the orange peel on the paint and looking for any areas that needed any more spot putty or any more Bondo, and just giving it a final once over basically before we got ready to spray that final coat of primer. And one thing, we're going to skip a little bit ahead of the video here as we're going, and we had some issues with the footage that we recorded last, so I lost that footage unfortunately, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we found and what we did, and we'll get to some still pictures later, but it's going to take a little more explaining than the pictures can show. So what we did is we were trying to get ready for spraying the door jambs with the top coat. And in order to do that, we had to take some more pieces out. And if you're familiar with T1N sprinters, they have little steps as you open up the driver and passenger side door. And those steps are effectively little plastic trays that sit down into a metal recess. And the way it's designed is the metal recess has a vent in it. And it turns out in our van, the metal vents were working in the passenger side door and the sliding door, but on the driver door, over time that vent had clogged up. And you can kind of see it in the shot here. The very front of that door we had to do some body work on right above the fender, and on the inside of it, where it seals with the rubber door seal, it is actually messed up as well. And so what I think happened is whenever that damage occurred, the van was still outside at that point, so every time it rained, the rain would run down there and then fill up the little step, and eventually the drain clogged. And so this caused it to just fill up with rust. And so when we took the tray out, the whole entire bottom of it was pretty much just orange from rust. So at first, we couldn't see through it at all, so we're like, okay, maybe just a little surface rust, and we'll be able to get it all clean. Unfortunately, that was not the case. It had rusted completely through the metal, and the only thing that was holding it together was the undercoat that was under it. And I think in this case, the undercoat actually hurt the van, because if it hadn't been there, it might have rusted through in one little spot and just drained from there basically. But the undercoat effectively just sealed everything back up and made it where the rust just kept getting worse and worse and worse. So we ended up having to do some work there that we weren't expecting, so it put us a little bit behind schedule, but we're still going to get done with the paint and the top coat all before we get to pollen season, because as you can see, we don't have a paint booth and we're going to be painting outside, so we really wanted to get done before all those pine trees you see in the back there started letting the pollen fly, because that would just ruin the paint job. We would have no way of keeping all of that pollen out of the paint, and we really wanted to be done before that time frame. So we're trying as hard as we can to finish up here in the next 3 to 4 weeks, get the top coat on, and we're going to do some Raptor coat on the bottom, basically below the line that is in the middle of the fenders. And then we're going to get some fender flares and let that bridge the gap on the rear, so that we'll be able to have Raptor coat running all around the bottom, and it'll be black, and we're also going to do the bumpers black. So speaking of being clean, in this shot here, we're wiping down the van. We've sprayed all the dust off of it. We're trying to get it as clean as we can before we spray that final full coat of primer. We're going to tape off the windows again. It's probably looking like a little deja vu here because you've seen this kind of shot before. That's kind of what I've learned here in the bodywork world. It's a lot of do it once, do it twice, do it 3 times, and I hope you like sanding, because it's a lot of sanding. That's one thing about this van. It has been more sanding than I ever imagined. I mean, if you think about it, like if you were to restore an old car, that would probably be a third of the surface area of this van. There's just so much area that you have to touch with sandpaper, and the windows are big to mask off. There's a lot of places you got to stretch the plastic all the way over the engine bay because we don't have the hood on, and it just takes a lot of time to prep for paint. So we got that full coat of primer on there. The van looked pretty good, and then here's the rust that we were talking about. You can see there, it's pretty much the entire bottom of it had some rust to it. So fortunately, the passenger side, it just had some mildew. Apparently the drains had worked in that side. It had drained like it was supposed to. And the sliding door as well, that one's a little tricky to get out. It's got 4 of those little bolts, but they're actually hidden under little inserts. You got to pry the inserts out. And when you pry the inserts out, hopefully you won't find what we did. There's a bunch of gunk and rubber bands and I guess spare pins from whoever owned the van before us. So we had to clean all that out. So this is the driver's side again after we started cutting. We cut out a rectangle there to get rid of that rust. And we took the Sawzall and we cut out the rest of the rust. We basically took it back to the areas where either the metal was good or we hit a structural support. And we wanted to get out as much as we could and then weld patches in to basically replace that metal that had rusted out. And so we got the holes cut out of it. We got everything ground down nice and as clean as we could get it so we could weld in the patches. And we decided to just spot weld the patches in. I'm going to come back over it with some seam sealer later and then put a really, really thick coat of paint in there, so we hopefully prevent any rust in the future. But fortunately, we were able to clean out the driver's side there. Looks nice and clean, no rust really, just very minimal. And under the sliding door, once we got it all cleaned out, everything looked good there as well. The roller was a little beat up, but we're going to replace that and we'll be good to go. So we decided to go with a green color, and it's actually the lunar rock that Toyota uses on their RAV4s. So thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, hit that like button. If you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. And if you have any comments, leave them below and we'll get back to you.